Hello everyone and welcome back. My name is Andy. I'm the managing consultant for Cybervenger. We are doing another part of our series on the NIST 800-171 standard. This standard, for those who don't know, is a standard that was produced by the Department of Defense to govern how contractors producing materials for the Department of Defense must store and protect their data. There is something called CUI, Controlled Unclassified Information. There's not the real fancy stuff like how missiles are built and that sort of thing. Think more mundane things like how to make a battery cable for an Abrams tank. It's information we don't want to advertise to our adversaries, but it's not super secret either. But in mass, in aggregate, if all this information was easily taken from our enemy, it could paint a picture that allow them to discover more about our military capabilities than we want to know. So it's still very important to protect it. And that's what the standard is all about. This week, we're focusing on a subset of that. We're going to be discussing wireless. How do you configure your wireless in your network to comply with the standard? Now, I've often talked about in other videos that there's a standard you have to follow. We should already be doing this. This is actually not new, although it seems like it. And then there's a certification body, the CMMC certification. That's very new. That actually has auditors come out and audit you to make sure that you're doing these standards the way you're supposed to. We go into more detail on that in another video. So it's important to make sure that we understand how to configure our wireless so that we can pass these kind of audits and that we can protect the sensitive information the way that the government needs us to. So wireless is covered by a number of controls. Now, again, going back to what the NIST is, there's 110 of these controls. And there's a few here that specifically name wireless in the description. It doesn't mean these are the only ones that come into play with wireless, but for the most part, they are. Now, there's also some basic philosophies to keep in mind when you are doing compliance in general. You want to get into the mindset of the folks at the NIST that produced these kind of standards. You want to always be able to identify who is doing what for accountability. This is a big thing. You'll see that mentioned a couple times in different subsets of these standards. You want to be able to restrict things unless absolutely necessary. You want to deny by default. You need a justification for why you need to access things. And that's even true not just of which file you're accessing or which program you're accessing, but also just getting onto the network itself should be able to identify the person on the network, grant or deny access based on their needs, and to log and track their activities, whether they're legitimate or not. They should be logged. There's a whole art to that. There's SIEM for log management and log parsing and alerting and that sort of thing. Monitoring, RMM tools, all that kind of comes into play here in wireless as well as with the rest of the network. But focusing on wireless, we're going to look at the standard itself now. I'm going to put our eyes down here and we're going to look at the first standard, 3.1.12. This is monitor and control remote access sessions. Now, remote access could be a lot of different things. It could be a VPN over the internet from your house back into the office. It could be, dial-up, I suppose. But wireless is kind of by nature remote access. It might be in a parking lot connecting into it or out in the warehouse floor. It's still technically remote. And a lot of people don't know this, Wi-Fi can actually go several miles if you configure it in a tower and set it up for long range. So Wi-Fi can actually travel quite a long range. So it is remote access, and a lot of the requirements for remote access would also apply to wireless specifically. And one of those major requirements is being able to authenticate, so you don't have people who are not part of the organization able to connect to the network and start hammering away at various nodes and trying to reach them and communicate with them. It's a little bit like a firewall. You want a firewall to stop outsiders from getting in. With wireless, you want to make sure that the access point can provide a proper barrier to authenticate and identify, as well as encrypt data that's going back and forth. So that's kind of mentioned by 3.12, and you'll see these concepts mentioned in other standards as well. So if you look down below, move on to the next one, we have 3.1.16, authorize wireless access prior to allowing such connections. Again, it's authentication at the network layer. This is not even talking about authenticating to applications or to Active Directory or to file servers or NASes. This is just to get on the network because wireless is kind of exposed. It's not protected by, being in the building. So you can use a couple different methods to accomplish this. You can use the poor man's method of using a MAC address. So you could filter by MAC address. Especially, this is good in small environments. The larger it gets, the more untenable this becomes. If you keep a spreadsheet or some document to track who has what MAC address. And if those of you don't know, a laptop or a tablet is going to have a unique MAC address per card, so you can identify the device. And then if you identify what the device is and you log manually who owns the device and who's in charge of it, you can therefore identify who's going on the network and who's not. This works, kind of. It's a little gray area. So if you had the solution that's working, I wouldn't be in a rush to rip it out maybe. Go after bigger fish first. But I wouldn't design network this way. The better way to do it, in my opinion, is to use EAP, Extensible Authentication Protocol. Most wireless systems today, at least the more enterprise ones, Aerohive, Meraki, and Ubiquiti, that and such, will support Extensible Authentication Protocol so that not only do you need your Wi-Fi password, you know the one I'm talking about, you go to a cafe and you say, hey, what's the Wi-Fi password? You go to your buddy's house, hey, what's the Wi-Fi password? That Wi-Fi password. That tends to get found out. One person figures it out, word of mouth spreads it all over the place. And that's exactly the kind of thing you want to avoid with NIST. We don't want unknown people being able to connect. So on top of that, you have username and password. This can be accomplished by using Radius server. So the wireless access point can connect to a Radius server to approve or deny the credentials. Radius usually is a kind of middleman. It'll talk back to, say, Active Directory, or it can have standalone credentials, however you want to configure that is fine. But the idea is that you would uniquely identify the particular person at the network layer. So that's that piece. So we'll move on to the next control here. Looking down. Our 3.17. Protect wireless access using authentication and encryption. So just like with the last standard I was talking about, we want to authenticate who the people is. Kind of beat a dead horse here, right? But they also talk about encryption. So I'm going to talk about that too for a moment. Encryption has to be an improved type of encryption. It can't just be any. Certain encryption standards have already been proven to be breakable, or at least, too easy to get in with modern computers. There are FIPS approved protocols for encryption that you have to use. FIPS is another standardized body. They do research and they select protocols that are proven to be durable enough for the purposes of NIST. One such protocol, or I guess three, is AES 128, 192, and 256-bit. This is a symmetrical protocol, so technically not as durable as asynchronous, but it's much quicker for regular use. Its performance is a question, but in AES is really good. It's very hard to break into that. Like I said, it's a FIPS-approved protocol. Fortunately, it's fairly common. Most modern wireless systems can handle that. Particular vendor use doesn't matter as long as you can as long as you can keep up with that particular standard. So that's encryption. So we'll move on now to the next one. We'll look down here again, and you'll see our next control is 3.1.18. Control connection of mobile devices. I don't want to get too much into the mobile devices themselves. This presentation is about wireless, but it's important to note, what's going to be wireless? A laptop, a tablet, a smartphone, right? These are the things you're trying to control. There's a whole art to controlling that. If you're going to have wireless, you need to do this. You need mobile device management. Apple has products for that. Android has products for that. There's a lot of different tools out there, so I won't get too much into that. But you need to be able to update firmware, put in security patches, manage them, so you can restrict applications from being installed. You don't put apps on there that are not allowed. Install apps that are required. Encrypt data in case any CUI ends up on the device. Right? We talked about CUI, controlled unclassified information. Another such activities. So you need that kind of function in there. Again, I want just glazing over that one. So suffice it to say, you have to have that in there. This control mentions wireless specifically, so that's kind of why it's in here. So we'll move on again. So we'll look below here. And 3.3.2, we want to ensure that the actions of individual system users can be uniquely traced to those users so that they can be held accountable for their actions. Once again, we're talking about being able to identify a specific user, what they're doing, and holding them accountable. This is all real good, bread and butter kind of compliance stuff here. And that comes down to being able to use EAP for authentication, but also having the logging. And then logging is so critical for forensics, for troubleshooting, for anything, for being able to hold our users accountable for what they're doing. If they're trying to access a device that they shouldn't have access to, well, why are they there? Maybe it's a part of their job that they need to do, and they haven't been explicitly authorized or whatever, or we can improve the process, or maybe they don't need to access that thing, or it's not always malicious, but it's still important to be able to hold people accountable to improve security overall. So that's what that standard talks about. Moving down here again, 3.4.2, establish and enforce security configuration settings for information technology products. This comes into vendor-specific stuff, so it's a very generic standard. It doesn't really say anything. If I'm looking, if I read through this, it talks about the firewalls and gateways and miscellaneous stuff using parameters that the manufacturer recommends. Quick example is manufacturer of Sonic walls recommend that you change the username and password of their firewalls when they come out of the box. They all come with admin as the username, password as the password. It's been around for 30 years. Every IT tech has ever put in a Sonic wall knows what I'm talking about. You can't leave those default. You have to change them. Manufacturer recommendations, kind of obvious, but this control says, hey, we can't possibly think of all the settings that need to secure your network. We're requiring you to go to your vendor and follow their advice and do things. And there may be other standards like disabling features that you don't need in your access point. If you got some kind of all-in-one wireless device that has, I don't know, a NAS built into it or whatever device, you want to turn all of that stuff off. If it's not critical, if it doesn't need to be there, you turn it off. You want to reduce your attack surface. It's another common theme in security. You want to reduce the number of opportunities for the bad guys to break in, right? If it's not even on, it doesn't matter if there's a flaw on it. It's not on. They can't get to it. So that's an important concept. And there's other configuration settings. Maybe it's turning on CRC checks for firmware or some kind of packet signing or something. It's all about learning about the device you're trying to put in and learning how to configure it for a high security environment. So you want to follow the vendor's recommendations there. So that's all of that. I can go on and on for hours about this specific control, guessing at what vendor requirements there are, but I think you get the point. So moving on here to the last one, 3.14.6. So again, we're talking about being able to monitor and log, but we also want to be able to detect attacks specifically. This is a whole process called intruder detection systems. A lot of firewalls have intruder IPS, IDS, those are abbreviated, as an option. You usually got to pay for it because typically the way intruder protection works or intruder detection works is that it's going to have a subscription where it recognizes certain behavior on the network as bad or suspicious to flag. And you want to maintain that definition. So access points, wireless access points, can need to do that as well, depending, of course, on the vendor. You want to make sure that you're not using a home user grade wireless access point. They can be expensive using manageable access points, but you have to do that. You have to be able to log, track, do intruder detection or intruder prevention if possible, where it can actually take action to stop the bad guy in their tracks, not just alert. But you want to be able to manage it. You want to be able to manage your firmware updates. You want to be able to have a dashboard where you can see the condition of your access point, or any of them warning that it's behind any patching or seeing any performance degradation. Other features that are real important too is the ability to scan for rogue access points. A big problem with wireless, kind of a common hacker thing to do, is get your own access point, plug it in somewhere in the building. If you're out, if you happen to be in the building, or even in around maybe a neighboring building where someone could pick up the signal. You name the access point name the same as a production. Somebody might grab it by mistake, and then you control everything that's going through it, and you can see other packet. You can see the data. You can see where they're going on the internet. They may not have access to their stuff, but it's definitely a lot of potential for bad acting to allow rogue access points to go unchallenged, undetected, and unknown. So you have to have that capacity in there as well. But that's pretty much what that one covers. And it's similar stuff. You see a pattern here. You want to be to detect. You want to be able to name who's who. You want to log and alert, all that kind of thing. And you want to segregate. You want to deny by default. This is a phrase you should burn into your brain when it comes to NIST. Nobody should have access to anything unless they could prove they need it. The less access, the better. Inadvertent granting of rights or generous granting of rights has caused a lot of security breaches. People who shouldn't have access to things. No harm done on their part, but that access was compromised by the bad guy and then abused. I always think of how many people are stuck in the local domain admin groups by default. Owners, CFOs, they don't need admin rights to do their job, all right? So they shouldn't be in there. Similar concept with wireless. You don't want the wireless to have access to stuff it doesn't need. So if you are accessing a program and just a very isolated program, you can use a VLAN or other technologies to segregate your wireless to only being able to reach that single function that you need. You can control it at the network layer. So this is beyond just having user permissions on your file server or on your application or anything like that. This is making sure that the network itself can't even reach those systems if you don't need them. If you're not authenticating against Active Directory, why should your wireless network be able to reach your Active Directory domain controllers? They shouldn't. Or any other example you can think of. So we want to control that as well. So that's pretty much it in review. There's a lot of questions, a lot of kind of gray area to go over. Some of what I'm discussing is sort of our official opinion rather than what's been detailed out in NIST. Now, if you want information on NIST or on these standards, you can go directly to nist.gov. I encourage you to do so. All these standards are written there. Any data you're going to get out, any instructions and documentations and videos like this are all going to source that website, as we did here. So it's nice to kind of be starting with that. Although, I got to warn you, a lot of their stuff is rather dry and hard to read, kind of government speak. But that's why we have videos like this, to help make it easier to digest and understand. If you do have questions, put them in the comments below here. We do our best to answer them in a timely fashion. Of course, we have limited resources to who we can. But it's an opportunity to get a very valuable and generally expensive service. I mean, IT people, particularly security, are a rather expensive resource. I like to think that we're a good value for what we charge, and certainly we're competitive with most IT companies, but you can't beat free, and that comment section is free. We can't promise we'll get to your question, but it's definitely something worth asking, especially if it's something that other users might learn from and appreciate as well. So if you liked our content, like and subscribe is always appreciated, and not necessary, of course. Until next time we talk, have a great time and stay safe out there.